Back during the pandemic or after the pandemic years, you were with me every month, so I know it's awesome to see you again. And with Miss Veronica. Anyways, hearing conservation in 60 minutes. That's going to be very interesting. As you all know, this is a very detail-oriented type of standard, meaning the regulation, it's even separated in different sections. And so we're going to do an overview and to give you tools because we always want to give you tools. Now, mind you, this is an updates series, which means I always start the webinar with a little bit of, hey, what's new, right? And the slideshow is always sent to you with my information in case you want to check us out, find out what are we doing, what are we up to these days. Definitely one of my main things is going out there to your sites, doing inspections, helping you guys, providing reports, talking to you, prioritizing safety efforts. But for the Kalosha updates, we have a list of things that have been going on just for the month of August. I wanted to know that there's been a couple of extreme heat advisories by Kalosha. And I know this is not new for you, but don't wait till the advisories are sent out. I want you to continuously monitor the weather. You know that. And I sent a newsletter last month, August 1st, about water because I've been noticing that a lot of us are failing to provide water that is free of cost. That is going to cost you dearly if there is a claim against your company for not providing water free of cost. And you may be thinking, but we do. We have water all the time. We have, the dispenser at the facility or at the office, whatever. That's not the point. The point is when you are at the work site, in the field, when you talk to the worker, is he going to buy his own water to the gas station? Is he bringing his own water from home? Is he not available to get that water from you, employer, immediately? That's the key. So that means you don't have replenishment procedures, etc. So I sent that out last month because I see these repeated extreme heat advisories from Kalosha. There was one employer that pled guilty to criminal charges after Kalosha investigation into a deadly nitrogen leak. And so this month I focus my newsletter. And for those of you that don't have access to my newsletters, by the way, it's a one-page thing. I don't send this long newsletter that you have to scroll down. No, it's always a one thing tip for you guys to see, kind of wake us up. Oh, we got to pay attention to this. And this month I sent it just to kind of keep an eye on things that could be silent killers, meaning we may not be aware of issues such as carbon monoxide and in this case nitrogen leaks that kill people. And so it's kind of like the black swan event at our facilities. Don't wait for that. Don't wait for a wake up call of this nature. And so there's more. The link to this Kalosha updates will be placed. Let me see if I can just do it right away because I know you guys love having those links. Yes, I will put it here in the chat so that you can do it in your own time. Take a look at it and click on each of those links. All right, so now let's keep going. That death occurred because of something similar. This picture on the screen is not related directly to that incident of the December 1st, 2020 death. This is another picture, same example, a poultry processing facility, and the Chemical Safety Board investigated it. So it has to do again with a nitrogen leak that kills people. And what it is this cold freezers are a walk-in area, and people just go in and then it doesn't smell any different, but they just die because nitrogen displaces oxygen. So that room or area is not has what we call an immediately dangerous to life and health atmosphere because there's no oxygen. So your brain basically shuts down, you pass out, and you die within minutes. This is what's happening. And beyond the human laws, there's so much that happens after that when someone dies. And in this case, the employer is California Ranch Foods, a subsidiary of Golden West Food Group, pleaded guilty. And listen to this, the plea deal included a 1 million criminal fine, 1.6 million for safety improvements at the facility, 4 million donation to local food banks, 50,000 paid to Cal OSHA Bureau of Investigations, 3-year probation. And then the company had to settle civil lawsuits with families, with victims' families for 35 million. So for a smaller company and for them, this is a tremendous amount of difficulties because now for 3 years they're going to have to be subjected to inspections, which is really good, right, for safety purposes and for improvements. Nevertheless, no one wants to see this kind of loss. It's very tragic. It's a law. It's not a pretty sight. And going back to this picture, I just wanted to show you something as little as during, in this case, during the investigation, post-incident examination, it was found that this little bubbler tube was bent and out of what needed to be measuring the level of water in that tank. And that's what caused the malfunction and the alarm to be triggered for that case. But it was something similar for this other case, and it's a nitrogen leak, and it happens often in food processing plants. So just pay attention to what pieces of equipment you have and the dangers, the hazards. Maintain your equipment. Make sure that you have schedules to maintain your equipment. And anytime you have hazardous gases or releases or leaks that are possible in your facility, make sure you have monitoring, right? And gas meters, and just don't let these types of things happen to you. And it called my attention because this is within that link that I sent to you about latest news by Cal OSHA. That's important. It's an update series. I just want to highlight some things, right? Let's get back to noise, everyone. So when to survey, knowing the triggers and the limits, and mapping the program essentials. So I do have a 1-page, actually it's a 2-page kind of roadmap for you that I will email right along, or that Liz will email alongside the slideshow. So let's get started with, when is this important? Why is this important? So the California Code of Regulations has an entire list that goes from sections 5095 to 5100 that regulate hazardous noise, right? And then it's very clear at explaining that it does not apply to construction, oil and gas, so agriculture, it doesn't apply to them. And then the big question is, but wait a minute, construction workers deal with a lot of tools and things that are noisy. So does that mean that, who cares? Just give them a set of earplugs or earmuffs and they're okay? No. Most likely, if you get an OSHA inspection and there's a really blatant disregard for hearing protection, you would be cited under Injury and Illness Prevention Program because you're still required to find the hazards. And it is a known hazard that exposing workers to noise that is above 90 decibels in an 8-hour shift, average, time-weighted average in an 8-hour shift, is hazardous, that they will lose hearing because of the tools that they work with. So if you are not ensuring that you provide that you have an audit or a survey, you provide with the actual hearing protection devices or PPE, you will get in trouble. So don't rest in your laurels thinking, oh, it doesn't apply to me because I am in construction or agriculture. And let me just show you, because I want to make sure I show you that list of, so this standard right there, Article 105, control of noise exposure. This is an interesting thing. Normally one standard for bloodborne pathogens, one standard or one section for, let's say, aerosol transmissible diseases with their own appendices. But for control of noise exposure, there's a whole list, section 5095 all the way to 5100 with its appendices. So in the general, you're going to have all the definitions. You know that I'm big on definitions. This will tell you what each of these things mean. A lot of you were asking, actually, I had one question in the questionnaire for this webinar is about some of the terms. If you read this one, it'll clarify a lot of the things that you are trying to find out, such as what's criterion sound level, right? A sound level of 90 decibels. And that's directly tied to the permissible exposure limit. But then let's not get too hasty here. Let's go with the basics. 5096, exposure limits for noise. This is a huge, very important starting point because basically it says protection against the effects of noise exposure shall be provided when the sound levels exceed those shown in table N1. And this will give you the basis for some of your surveying and settings for your dosimeter. So it's kind of like the reason behind those numbers in the settings. Okay. And of course, in those exposure limits, it talks about that table where if you have an employee that is exposed to 90 decibels of noise in an A scale, you cannot expose that worker to this more than 8 hours, right? And this is in a time-weighted average. And of course, it goes all the way to 115, which is the maximum in this table, and therefore also the setting you will use for your survey. Okay, so kind of just giving you the basics. Why are these standards important? Everything on hearing protectors on 5098, everything on how to provide training and what to include in your training program. Then we go to the record keeping. It'll tell you how long you keep these records, how are you going to do this, and it also will call out the requirement to log in your OSHA logs whenever there's a standard shift, meaning people are losing hearing because of the noise at your facility, right? And there's some rules for that. I'll go quickly or briefly over that. Okay, so now I gave you an overview of the actual list of standards, the regulations, right? Now let's get into, I just want to go back to my PowerPoint. Let's go back to the key requirements action level, right? So what does that mean, an action level? You all know that OSHA will say, well, we have to have a number to trigger a series of actions. So that's what they call the action level, and they use it for several different regulations. And in this case, they say if you are exposing workers to 85 decibels of noise in an A scale. And what does the A scale means? A scale means the kinds of noises that actually will affect a person's hearing, human hearing. There's the C scale, which measures lower, more like humming motor sounds or lower tones, right? And the importance of the A scale has to do with that's where you will find all these kinds of noises that would affect human hearing. And that triggers a hearing conservation program. So it kind of starts, pointing out or bringing up those red flags, and you're like, okay, so how do I know that I'm at that 85 decibel of noise? Well, there's a rule of thumb, or there's a couple of things that you need to take into account. Number one, if as you walk, I'm always a big advocate for doing walkthroughs. Walk the plant, walk the floor, go to the field, assess your entire facility and its different establishments to find out how noisy it is. When I say how noisy, well, it starts with a simple just walk around and noticing that you have to shout when you're at arm's length, right? And there's different, you're going to notice that some people say 3 feet distance, you have to shout, or 6 feet distance, or arm's length. Listen, if you're shouting, it already means it's noisy in there, right? Another thing is maybe workers have been complaining of noise levels, and they've been bringing that through your effective injury and illness prevention program and letting you know that they go home with tinnitus, right? Ringing in the ears. All of those things give you these red flags where you know it's noisy enough so that you need to start surveying. And the hearing conservation program is not triggered unless you already proved through actually implementation of an actual dosimeter and actual program that you have 85 decibels or noise in those areas. The next thing is we have a permissible exposure limit of 90 decibels, right? That means that's the legal limit. You cannot expose people to more than that. And when I say these numbers, please remember, this is a time-weighted average. That means this is the number that the worker is hitting in an 8-hour shift when they move around and they work next to one machine and then with tools, and then they go to lunch and then they're quiet and they go to a room, there's no noise. So that's why it's a time-weighted average number, okay? And that is calculated through a formula. By the way, your audiologist will do these things, right? So in many of you, if you're an industrial hygienist, you are doing this kind of work. The permissible exposure limit is at 115 decibels for 15 minutes of continuous noise. Now, again, you have to be familiar with your definitions. And that's why I wanted to be brief at showing you sections 5095 to 5100, because you're thinking, what is continuous noise, right? And in your definitions, you'll see that they will define what continuous noise is versus impact versus intermittent. And so continuous means that there is this same kind of noise throughout, there's no difference, and it's a technical definition. There's a second interval. So whenever that noise is not more than 1 second interval, that's continuous noise, right? And so that's why that 115 decibels is in table one and one of the regulation, which I also showed you. And then it also says 140 decibels for impact noise is the limit as well. And impact noise, something like hammering, right? That produces impact noise. And an example of vibrating noise could be a nail gun. But see, here's the difference. A jackhammer would be considered continuous noise, not impact noise, just because the jackhammering noise is being produced at intervals of less than a second. So that is the importance of knowing your definitions. There's a couple of very good resources, and I have the State Fund has a great guide, and I want you to look at it because you one of the questions that I had was about, hey, can you give us a roadmap, something simple that we can follow? So I have a written map, but I also have a good guide here by State Fund that you can take a look at. So it's called A Guide to Hearing Safety, and it goes by sections, but here is the golden nugget. It goes, section one is basically the actual introduction. Section two, do I need noise monitoring? Which was one of the questions we had as well submitted before the webinar. And I love this, signs that you may need noise monitoring. And I already told you, people are shouting at the workplace, they go back home with buzzing or tinnitus ringing in the ears. Then it gives you the regulatory requirements, which I briefly discussed with you, some of the important definitions, and then it gets into taking noise measurements. And for those of you that are like, okay, just tell me already, can I use my NIOSH app to measure noise? You can. It definitely gives you kind of an idea. It's sort of like the initial, hey, are we shouting here? Let me see the level of noise. And then you can see, oh, well, it's 92, right? The importance of it is that even the NIOSH app allows for calibration, okay? And you need to use an external mic, and you need to use that device to calibrate your sound meter per your app. So even that. But it's a very informal kind of measurement. This is kind of like just finding out which are the danger areas in your facility. That's why and how you would use the NIOSH app. Make sure you calibrate it though. And I have a video for that in a moment. We'll play it. It's just a video from, I think it's a professor at a university, and he's showing his students how to do that calibration for the noise app. And that's good just as a starting point, but it doesn't meet the compliance requirements for sound level meters or dosimeters. Okay, so keep that in mind. So now it goes into taking noise measurements. And then here's the golden nugget, you guys. I love this chart. The section three of this guide by State Fund gives you a noise monitoring decision chart. And this is what you want. You're like, just give it to me easy. I just want something that is easy to understand, that I can take a look at, and it tells me what to do. Number one, if you suspect high noise levels, then survey those noise levels through the facility using a sound level meter. So can I use my NIOSH app? Yes, at the beginning, if you suspect high noise levels. How do I know if I suspect? Oh, take your phone and walk around with it. It's better if you use the attachment with the microphone to really capture a more accurate reading, because remember, decibels here really do matter because you're trying not to get to that 85 mark. But if you suspect, so you start with the NIOSH app at the first starting point. Do you suspect high noise levels? Yes, because I walked around the facility with my phone and I did see 100, 115 here and there, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so yes, up until that point, you've been using your NIOSH app. Now, that's the only place where you would use it. And then you go to the next one. Well, yeah, I suspect noise levels. I walked around with my app. Okay. I'm going to now do a survey of the noise levels throughout the facility using a sound level meter. So now you have to use an actual device and take a look at calibration before and calibration after the fact. You also have to know what settings. And this is why it's so important to use the help of an industrial hygienist or a professional, right? Someone that comes and does this for you. They're okay, I'm going to survey the noise levels throughout the facility using a sound level meter. I'm going to bring my map. You bring a map of the facility, and now you're going to pinpoint the problematic areas. You go, listen, the results were below 85 decibels in an A scale, right? And what does that mean? That means that you actually took the measurements in a time weighted average, and the results were, I'm sorry, this is before you do the actual personal dosimeter, but you go, oh, I pinpoint the actual areas. The results are below 85 decibels of noise. Okay, then we do not have to do, if the sound levels are well below 85 decibels of noise, no further action is necessary until anything changes at the workplace. But how about the results from this survey, from this noise survey, is near or exceeds 85 decibels of noise? Then you have to do dosimetry. And that means not the regular survey noise level with a sound level meter that is area specific, where you set it on a tripod in the noisy areas, but now you get into choosing a device that is going to be attached to the worker. And you're going to have to make decisions as to what type of device, because dosimeters come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. Sometimes, if the noisy environment also includes working with chemicals, etc., then you need to choose a device that you can put inside a pocket or of their coveralls, and that will have a microphone to capture the noise that can be clipped near the area, the hearing zone, right? So now you go, okay, I need to have noise dosimetry conducted. And then you get into, oh, well, we did it. And for having this noise dosimetry conducted, you are actually going to have to choose which workers, a representative sample, right? And then you get into, okay, well, the results were below 85 decibels. If dosimetry results in an 8-hour time weighted average are below the 85 decibels, no further action is needed because you didn't hit that action level. So no hearing conservation program is needed unless you bring a new machine, a new robotic arm, anything that may change the noise exposure. And then you go, well, I did the noise dosimetry, we conducted it, and the results are at or above 85 decibels of noise. Okay, now you're gonna make sure that all the group of workers within that representative sample are included in your hearing conservation program. So now you have the requirement per the regulation to implement a hearing conservation program in departments or areas that are above that 85 decibel time weighted average. And you are now going to consider, you're not mandated at this point, but now you have to consider using engineering, administrative, and PPE, right? Why? Because you start getting up there where you almost hit the 90 decibel mark, which is your legal limit. You can't go beyond that. Okay, so you do that, and now you go, but I do have some results above that 90 decibels. And then you say, okay, so if those dosimetry results exceed the 90 decibels of noise, I need to implement, now I'm mandated. It's not just considering it, but now I'm mandated to implement feasible engineering and or administrative controls to reduce noise exposure. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Number one, feasible engineer would be looking in machinery and equipment to see if there is new machinery and equipment that is less noisy. Sometimes there's very good stuff out in the market that is new, is more expensive, but then you need to do that. You're required to look into it, right? To see what's the feasibility. The word is feasible. Can you do it? Is it possible for you without going bankrupt to replace all these old machines and get new ones? The next thing is, okay, no, that's not a possibility. What else can we do? We're still stuck with engineering controls, right? And we always go down this hierarchy of controls. Maybe you can't get rid of that part of your process and voila, you're done with the whole thing. We think of elimination first. But if not, we get into engineering controls. Maybe for engineering controls, you're thinking, let's muffle out the sound. Let's implement some controls. You get your engineers out in the plant, you call the manufacturer for that type of equipment, and you start talking about how can we muffle the sound. right? So that's what you're required to do when the results are above 90 decibels of noise. An example administrative control would be something like, well, if the maximum then is 4 hours at 90, what if I put two workers, right? So I can complete that shift. And that's an administrative control. It's not really eliminating the problem, it's not engineering it out, but you're also now looking into work schedules and the way you do the task. If noise levels are not reduced below 90 decibels after you did this, you switched some machines, you implemented some administrative controls, etc., and you still couldn't reduce it below 90 decibels, maybe it's 91, 92, now you have to provide with hearing protection devices, and you're required to do this for all employees that are exceeding that exposure above 90 decibels of noise. And the choosing of these protectors is also according to the regulation, right? Because as you know, personal protective equipment depends on a human being to put it right, right? And if or not to forget, and we forget and we put it wrong. So there's issues with the seal, etc. when we are wearing hearing protectors, and you need to include that also in your training program, etc. So I love that decision or flow chart. Then it goes into the elements, so it gives you a summary of the main elements of your hearing conservation program. You went through your decision making. Now you know you have to have a hearing conservation program. Okay, so what does that need to include? Noise monitoring, right? So the requirement is that you do it once you suspect the noise is above 85, and then once you confirm that it's 85, having the hearing conservation program. And then it says anything that changes will trigger a new noise monitoring. Nevertheless, companies do, and for my clients, I always tell them, do it annually, or if your process is changed quite often, maybe even sooner. There's a requirement for audiometry. So you have to have an audiologist, that professional, a licensed and certified professional who helps you with your surveillance program. Because there's a lot of technical and detailed information, right? Even the settings of your sound level meters, even the settings of your dosimeters, it has to be a person that knows what they are doing. Training, at least annually, you have to have them training how hearing loss occurs. Listen, knowledge is power. If they don't know how their hearing works, the outer ear, the middle ear, the inner ear, and where that exchange of vibrations and that liquidy medium happens and how it all takes place and what hearing loss is, workers are not empowered. Workers are not readily willing to say, "Oh, I want to make sure I don't miss the opportunity to protect my hearing." So training is crucial. You have to tell them what hearing loss is and how it occurs, and that there's no cure for it, right? That is key. So they need to. There's no cure. No, doesn't matter how advanced we are and all the AI we have. We have no cure for hearing loss. All right. And then there's an entire section after you put together your training, an entire section for how you are providing those hearing protection devices. You cannot just say, well, I feel like we just give them earplugs and it's the standard thing for everybody and that's it. No, there's an actual requirement for you to provide different types and have workers look into fit and comfort. Because if they're not comfortable, remember, we're all different. Our ear canal is different. Some of these earplugs will cause irritation. People will not like them and will not use them. And also because there are advantages and benefits of wearing one thing versus the other, plus the environment, the weather, all matters, right? So you have to really write down where and what are the conditions under which these hearing protection devices are going to be used. And then there's a whole appendix. Remember, I showed you on the list of standards by Kalosha on how to apply that NNR, which is the noise reduction rating of each of those foamy earplugs. How are you going to apply it towards the noise reduction? Is it really going to reduce noise 30 decibels just because the box or the wrapper of that earplug says it reduces it 30? The actual NNR is 30. So if I have 100 decibels of noise, oh, voila, we got it down to 70. It doesn't happen like that. You have to use there's a couple of methods within the regulation that you need to use to actually determine if that earplug is really going to do the job. All right. So, and record keeping. Now you have to keep records of those, of the audiometry, of the noise monitoring, and your employee training. And there's different um, triggers. So, for example, for your employee records of noise exposure and noise monitoring, that's the time of employment plus 30 years, right? And for your records of audiometry is 2 years. So there's different requirements. And I like that this guide is very nice at giving you a summary of all those appendices, all of those things that are needed. So you can use this, print it out, and go back to the regulation to kind of go through what's needed. So great guide. I want to spend some time on it because I really thought this one has that nice flow chart. Who needs night control? And the last thing I want to show you about this guide, you're going to love it, it's the actual forms. The forms are awesome. Look at this one, the sound level meter survey record. The time, your location and description, the sound level and dBA. And then it gives you a double asterisk because it kind of tells you, wait a minute, if possible, you're going to have a map so that you can mark the locations where the problematic areas are at. And then it also says measurements must be made with A scale slow response settings. And so this is where the compliance part of the regulation comes into place. So this is how you're going to take those initial measurements, right? You're doing your sound level meter, which is usually that area meter that you place on a tripod, right? Or maybe you walk around with one, but it has to be with specific settings. And then you have a record. So you have your diagram there. Maybe your map of the location is placed there. And you have a noise dosimetry survey record. So what's the difference here? Now, this one is the personal device. This is the one that the workers are going to carry. So you're going to put the dosimeter serial number, the calibration. You have to make sure you did a pre-test, post-test survey. Who's the employee being surveyed? Wait a minute. No. That's not what this is all about. Representative. Because the regulation says that someone like a union rep or someone from the workforce can accompany you during the measurement taking, you put the last name and the first name there, right? Department, work area, job title, you're going to put there. What is this for? Who is this for? Which department? What work area or job title? And you can also provide a diagram of that department on the back of this form. The time you started the actual dosimetry and the finish time. And then you're going to have the Callow-Chappelle 8-hour time weighted average and the Cal-OSHA hearing conservation 8-hour time weighted average. So this relates to the PEL of 90, and the second column relates to the action level of 85, right? So basically it's giving you a chance to make that decision as to who you're going to be including in the hearing conservation program. And I like these forms, and they give you little tips and information such as measurements must be made within an A scale, slow response setting, monitor the full shift, employees with exposure levels are above the action level of 85 decibels over an 8-hour time weighted average must be in the hearing conservation program, must be informed of their exposure results. New dosimeter measurements should be taken whenever changes in production are made. So we know that, right? The noise monitoring compliance checklist is also a good form. Reviews, and it tells you go back to this guide and review the sections, and you can have a target date so that you can complete it. So it really is walking you through by the hand on how to get the job done, because now it's telling you, okay, do this first, do this next, and have a target date when you're going to complete this. So great forms that you can implement for you to put together your hearing conservation program. An audiometry compliance checklist. So I love this. You review the section that talks about it, and then it says you have procedures to ensure the baseline and annual audiometry is conducted on all employees. You develop the procedures, you obtain relevant licenses, certifications, calibration records, and test booth background sound pressure. So it triggers things that the regulation requires, because even the test booth background sound pressure levels are required to be kept as part of your records, okay? So when you don't understand why something is in these forms, they took this straight out of the requirements from the regulation. Then there's the training compliance checklist, which is also very good, and the hearing protection compliance checklist. So reviewing section 4, and then HPD stands for hearing protection device, the type, the brand or the model, the NNR, which stands for noise reduction rating, and where is it going to be used. So this is really good. It really helps you to complete that program, the whole program that you want. And then the record keeping compliance, right? This is very good. For example, it says set up a sound level meter survey, noise dosimetry survey file. So now you have the area sound level meter records and the noise dosimetry, which are the personal um, uh, results. All of that, you have to have a file for that. You keep all records of noise monitoring. Then you set up an audiometry services file. You keep all the records pertaining to who are you calling to do this audiometry, right? So the van that gets there, what are their license, their certification, the calibration records, background sound pressure. So I love it. I love it. This is just very good. Audiometry program evaluation checklist, questions for the audiometry services provided. So these are the things that you're looking for because the regulation requires, for example, that the audiologist, the technician at a minimum, meets the current requirements of the Council for Accreditation in Occupational Hearing Conservation or a similar accreditation organization. So this helps you make sure that you have the right person working with you on this whole hearing conservation program. Then your audiometry program evaluation checklist continuation is part of that form. And then the training record for each worker or the workers, and then the program. So they also give you forms for the program. The coordinator responsibilities, you have to have a person in charge of this program, usually is the safety director who needs to be very familiar with all of this. And I always advise that it is your safety director and he works in conjunction with the audiologist or your industrial hygienist if you have one on site, or you work with a consultant. So you are the program coordinator's responsible person. You're the administrator. That doesn't mean you know it all and you come back with all of these numbers and all this decision-making process. But you do need to know the regulation. You do need to know who's suffering a standard threshold shift, who is losing hearing because of your workplace, and you need to know when you are going to, because usually it's you who triggers that OSHA log requirement, meaning, hey, now, because remember the OSHA logs are a separate requirement that says, hey, if someone is injured at the work site, there's some criteria that tells you you need to put it on that log. And then every March, every year, OSHA, federal OSHA receives those logs, remember? Okay, well, this is part of it. Hearing loss is part of uh, record keeping for OSHA, putting it on your log. But there is an actual process for it, and you need to be familiar with it as the program coordinator. All right, lots of great info. I don't know if there's questions up until right now. Liz is going to put in the chat a couple of videos. One is for knowing how to calibrate your NIOSH app and how to do it. Just a quick video, like a 3-minute video on ABC steps so that you go out there and do your initial survey. And then there's another video that we will also post that is very helpful. And if we have time, we'll play it, but I don't think so. And I found this one is by a company called Ally Safety. Their videos are really good. She's an industrial hygienist. And what I like is that she always brings everything in plain terms. And there's a couple of technical things that she goes through, but you can stop and say, okay, so this has to do with the regulation. She's mentioned this criteria and it has to do with the regulation. For example, she says that when you do the personal dosimeters, you have to make sure that the setting is the upper limit is set at 115 decibels of noise. And then you know why, because table N1 has that upper limit, right? But she doesn't get into a lot of details. But with this webinar and that video, you'll kind of understand why. It's 60 minutes. We really, and maybe 50 minutes because I did spend some time on those updates, right? To get the nitty-gritty of noise or hearing conservation at the job site. Let's see. Where were we?
Alba, we have two questions.
Go
The
for it.
the first is, could you please repeat how the standard applies in constructions and what should be considered in this industry?
Okay. So for construction, you're not required to have a hearing conservation program. That's basically it. You're not required to go through all those forms that I showed you. You don't need to have uh, records of the van that comes over, the annual audiometry test. Oh, you're not required to do any of that. But you are required to know that if they are in exposed to machinery or equipment that is hazardous, you should do an audit. And it looks a lot like doing a survey with your area dosimeters or personal dosimeters and getting some results so that you get into, oh, you know what? This person is exposed to more than 90 decibels of noise. So let's look into, so you would use some of these tools. The only thing that you escape from is having a formal hearing conservation program and the annual audiometric test. That's the basic answer there. Does that make sense? What was the second part to that question? I forgot.
What should be considered in this industry?
Just that, the fact that if you know they're exposed to noise, you should do it. You should do audits and then find out, are the machines that they're using too noisy because they're old? So you start doing hierarchy of controls. You're not required to do the hearing conservation program, but now you need to find out what can we do to reduce the noise. And once you do everything you can to reduce the noise, such as eliminating that process, buying better machinery and equipment, less noise by switching where they do the work, and then administrative controls such as using that table N1, how many hours at which exposure, and many times the equipment that they're using will tell you or give you kind of an idea, what this saw is at 110 decibels of noise when it's being operated. All of that gives you an idea. So now that triggers you thinking maybe for the masons that are usually cutting stone, I should do an audit to find out what's the time weighted average kind of exposure. And then you get into, they are at the 85 decibel of noise. So let's just bring it down with, because remember, there's more conservative numbers. That's just OSHA limits. But when you really study this, you find out that even when they're at 85, there can be some damage to hearing. And so if you look into the NIOSH REL, the recommended exposure limit, it's below, they talk about 80 decibels of noise. So you're thinking, okay, so to bring it below the REL, the recommended exposure limit, we are going to provide them with earplugs that have an NNR of 30. And then for these guys that are doing this activity and they are also using a jackhammer, we're going to provide them with an earplug of NNR of 25 plus earmuffs that are maybe high end or not very high end, the cheapy kind, and you just add +5 to that NNR. There's a method to it. So you would have to either stay a little bit after this whole thing is over. I just want to go over another guide here by Kalosha, but that's the answer. So you're required to look into the actual noise they're exposed to and give them a PPE after you do an actual analysis of engineering controls and administrative controls. That's your requirement. Otherwise, you could be cited because it's a hazard, a known hazard. So this is a good Cal OSHA guide. It tells you a lot of the definitions. It's more user friendly, and then it goes into those requirements. So I love this image because right here, the cartoon is showing the sound level meter. And then the picture with the actual worker is showing a dosimeter, personal dosimeter. So that's right there the difference between the two devices. And this is not the NIOSH app. This is not the phone. You will only use the phone in the beginning when you want to make sure, hey, maybe we do have some problematic areas. So it just kind of gives you a sense of whether or not you need to do what? The cartoon sound level measurement, that image, okay? And so equipment accuracy, type 1 for the sound level meters are more expensive, they're more precise. Type 2 is still enough for compliance. And then it tells you why. It gets into octave band analyzers. I primarily use to determine the dominant frequency that make up noise. It's important information. We determine the best type. So they get into technical information so that you can find out why you're doing what. And more OSHA requirements when you're at 90 decibels, no more than 8 hours, 95, 4, 100, no more than 2, because every 5 decibels, then the dose of noise doubles up, right? So, and here is a note on agriculture, construction, oil and gas, blah, 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 are covered by this exposure limits, but exempt from the requirements of section. And then it just told you the section. Basically, you're not required to have a program, but you're still required to keep them under this table N1. That's why I like these two guides. I'm going to put this one as well in the chat. Any other question at this point?
Yes, so we have one more. The question is, if an associate is deaf, but in an area above the action level and or at the PEL level, do they need to wear hearing protection?
Yes. In short, the short answer to that question is yes. So you have to now take a little bit more time finding out how you're going to go about protecting a worker that has already some hearing deficit. So he's deaf, maybe in one ear, and he's wearing a hearing aid. Okay, now hearing aids amplify noise. They're trying to capture more noise. So now you have to make a decision as to, does this worker need to hear alarms? Does this worker need to hear certain communications? And the communications for this worker, because I hired him and I'm making accommodations. So maybe for communications with him, I'm using a vibrating device that he carries around in his pocket because he can't hear very well. So you're already making accommodations. If you don't have any of those accommodations and the worker does not need to hear certain alarms, there's no need for him to communicate during those 2 hours of high level noise exposure. And what do I mean by that? Go by that table, N1. He needs to be 2 hours and at 95 decibels of noise. How do I protect him? Well, you need to bring it down to 90, under 90, because that's the PEL, right? So you're going to do this with the actual physician or the audiologist that is helping you out. Because for this particular worker, you may need to say, no, you can't wear your hearing aid while you're doing this job. Or you know what? You can. Let's keep your hearing aid because I'm going to put now a piece of personal protective equipment such as earmuffs. So this is part of that decision making with your PPE. Now that you know that he's exposed to high levels of noise and you know that you have to bring it down below 90 and that he wears a hearing aid, you're making a decision with the physician. Okay, can he keep it because he needs to hear this communications? So it's all decision making. Or no, he doesn't need to hear that. Okay, so then he doesn't need to have something that amplifies the noise, which is going to give him the earmuffs and the earplugs because it's only 2 hours in this area. There's nothing dangerous. He's just noise, right? Or no, yes, he needs to hear some communications. Okay, keep your hearing aid, but now you're going to give him something like it's a more specialized piece of equipment. It's an earmuff that is electronic. It's an electronic device that will distinguish the noises in the outside and reduce them under the 90 decibel requirement, but still will let him hear communications. So those earmuffs are about $100 a piece. They are more costly, but you still need to provide them with the hearing protection. I hope that answered it because it's a great question, and some of you will come up against that. Okay, so we know the triggers. We talked about this, and then I told you why definitions are so important. And then we talked about how do we measure sound, and this is straight from OSHA, the noise. So hertz and decibels are both taken into account. Hertz is the pitch, decibels the loudness, and then we need to also take into account duration. Those are the main things that we're looking into. Hertz, which is the pitch, decibels, which is the loudness, and the duration for how long are they exposed to this. And this is why the settings in your sound level meters matter. Another view of decibels and loudness that we kind of understand, this is by the Washington State Department of Labor and Industries, which, by the way, has a great slide deck. With this particular slide is from their slide deck. They have 3 modules, and it's geared towards the construction industry. So their rules are a little bit different than federal and Cal OSHA. Nevertheless, they do have a great guide for construction sites that last less than a year and how to go about protecting workers for noise. And so this is a great example on how decibel works because you may have two machines that make the same kind of noise, but that doesn't mean you're going to get double, like 200 decibels of noise. The actual measurement on your sound level meter will be at 103, but that's because that 3 decibel difference is actually telling you that the acoustic energy is doubled up, right? And so there's different physics in action here. One is the acoustic energy generated by noise, and another one is the actual decibels, meaning the unit that we go by that tell you the dose of noise a worker receives. And every time you go 5 decibels more, the dose is doubled up. So that's why um, the five scale matters. So there's a quick example there also in the field. We determine the loudness of two compressors. Is it, do we add, do we subtract? If one is 89 decibels, the other one is 87. How do we know how much noise is this worker exposed to? Well, first of all, you do not add, you do not subtract. What you need to do is take that personal sampling to know exactly the time weighted average, right? To know if you're going to do something. Because as much as we know the noise levels of different kinds of equipment, we also know that that worker is not doing that 8 hours a day. This is why the importance of those representative samples with an attached dosimeter. There's a good International Labor Organization guide as well. I like that document. And here is the roadmap. So basically, assigning the administrator, finding the noise, the walkthrough, raise your voice type of cue, then making sure that you measure for compliance. On this one, the NIOSH app is where we have the link for the how to calibrate your phone thingy. And then number 3 is measuring for compliance. So that's where I have the link for that video that explains more about the area sound level meter versus the personal dosimeters. You do that so that you can decide the triggers. If you have more or equal to 85 decibels of noise in a time weighted average, you have to enroll those workers in that department in your hearing conservation program. If it's more and above equal or more than 90 decibels in a time weighted average, now you have to take a look at table N1 and start looking into feasible engineering and administrative controls and never exceeding that 140 decibels peak limit, right? So there is the table per the regulation, and I also put the section 5096 is the one that has just the exposure limits for noise. Here is an example of that sound level meter and the personal dosimeter, and here is the comparison, what the sound level meter does and the noise dosimeter. So basically, the sound level meter, instant reading of the current noise level in that area versus the noise dosimeter, which integrates the average noise levels over time, the dose that that worker is receiving, recording fluctuations in intensity and duration. Number 5, notify and enroll affected employees, and that's a requirement in the regulation. Who do you notify? The people that were part of that representative sample. You need to tell them this is the noise, this is the results, and you need to give them that information the moment you get those results, okay? Now, there's a requirement for the standard threshold shift. So if people are losing hearing after you do the every year audiology testing, if they're losing hearing, then you have 21 days to tell them about it, right? And 21 days after you've done the retesting, because there's also an allowance there to retest within 30 days to verify if really there is a standard threshold shift. I know there's a lot of information, but at least you will walk away today with good tools, 2 guides, 2 videos, and an actual roadmap. Provide hearing protection devices. So HPD stands for hearing protection devices. You have to evaluate them to see if they really attenuate noise, but you use Appendix E. And this is so key, guys, because you're not just going to flip a coin and say, I think I'm going to give you hearing protectors in the form of earplugs, or hey, I think I'm going to give you hearing protectors in the form of earmuffs. You're actually going to, and then I wanted to keep an eye out here. Let's see. No, not that. Hold on. I'm trying to look for that one. Hearing protectors. There's the methods. Let's say you choose method B, hearing protection attenuation. The employer shall evaluate hearing protection attenuation for the specific noise environments. Employers shall use one of the methods described in Appendix E. So now you go to Appendix C and it tells you what are the methods. So number B says, when using a dosimeter that is not capable of C-weighted measurements, the following method may be used. Convert the A-weighted dose. So listen to this. Since you did take measurements in the A-weighted dose, time-weighted average, you subtract 7 decibels from the noise rating. So that's when I said if you buy an earplug that is 30 decibels, that's the density of the foam, that's how the protection. You're gonna subtract 7. That means it's really going to provide you 23 decibels of noise reduction. Why? Because there could be leakage and people put it wrong, etc. Right? That's where this comes into play, this Appendix C. So I just gave you a quick example because trust me, 60 minutes. Wow, we're rushing through this. What else? Here we go.
Uh,
Use Appendix C, require the use at PEL, meaning if you're at 90 decibels of noise, there's a requirement for them to wear those hearing protection devices, okay? So either earmuffs, ear caps, earplugs. Also, there's a requirement to use them while you have that baseline pending. So you just hire the audiologist and you don't know what their baseline is. You have to have those, the PPE being worn. And considering dual protection for very loud impulse tasks. Use Appendix C. It'll tell you how to do the additional earmuff. You do the, for example, NNR reduction is 30 minus the 7, that's 23. But now you put an earmuff on top, you can only add 5. So that would be 28. And that's how you would subtract it from what they're being exposed to, right? Very cool. Baseline within 6 months or a year if you're doing a mobile van. Okay, so that's your audiometry requirements. And then annually thereafter. Remember that there's a 14-hour quiet period requirement for an employee not to be exposed to noise prior to their test. And that's very important because we forget sometimes we schedule their hearing test and we forget to tell them, hey, you can't go to a concert, so no noise outside of work, right? Quiet period so that they can have a good baseline and you can actually have numbers that make sense. Same for their annual, right? For you don't want them to be exposed to noise because then that measurement will be not accurate. And then annual training is also required on the effects of noise, the purpose of the PPE that they're going to wear, the geometry tests purpose and how to access the regulation. This is a little bit of what I told you. This is the label for one of those headsets that can be put over the head, behind the head, or under the chin. So even that setting makes it change as to the rating. For hearing protection, make sure that you, and this is kind of like what I was telling you, do not subtract the NNR from the noise level. Make sure that you use a formula per Appendix E, which is the safety factor, right? It's a little bit of this because of the leaks in the seal, the vibration, the improper insertion. People walk around looking like Frankenstein, so we don't want that. The noise, for example, from an average chainsaw is 110 decibels. If you're wearing ear plugs of 20 with a 25 noise reduction rating, do you have enough protection to place you below? Well, you could say an NNR of 25 minus 7, which is the safety factor, that's 18. So 90 minus 18, that's 72. But just so you know, some of you have told me that you've heard of that 18 also being divided by 2. That gives you 9. So 110 from the chainsaw minus 9 is 101. Which one do you use? The dividing it by 2, it's per the OSHA technical manual. That's for inspectors. So they will use this much of a reduction to kind of give them an idea as to whether or not you should be implementing engineering controls for that particular task or department. So you're only required to do the minus 7 to implement the use or to decide which type of hearing protection device you're going to give them. But know that OSHA does have a technical manual that says now divide that by 2 so that it gives you an idea that they're still above the conservative level of the actual PEL of 90. And if they are, they should be implementing engineering administrative controls. So here is a hearing impaired worker protocol for the person who asked that question. So measure the exposure. Remember to get that representative dosimetry for that department that includes that person who's deaf. And then remember, if he has hearing aids, you have to take that into account and now make a selection for the hearing protection device. check the attenuation according to Appendix E, and then fit the worker and verify. Train for donning and doffing, and do controls and accommodations. So I give you the example here and a little bit of that active hearing protection, the electronic earmuffs sample as we discussed. Very cool for training, like I said, training is knowledge is power. Make sure that you include everything that the requirement of the regulation talks about. I like to give them an example of hearing losses like grass that is healthy. Your ears are healthy first, and then that cilia inside the cochlea looks like this. And then when you have a lot of noises, like if people were stepping on your lawn and destroying the grass, and it doesn't come back. It never comes back. So there's no cure for that. The cilia die to the point where they go from healthy to they can't recover. The next steps or the last steps for your roadmap for hearing protection is record keeping. Remember, for noise measurements, 2 years, I already told you that. Audiograms for the duration of employment. And the standard threshold shift, you gotta follow up and have a written notice for workers within 21 days. And then you have to take a look at the CalOSHA log. You need to log it. If there's a standard threshold shift that is 10 or more at 2000, 3000, 4000 hertz, plus there's two criteria. Plus there's an average at ear level of more than 25, and there's a computation that needs to happen. There's an actual Excel page that makes the computation for you. If those two criteria are met, then it needs to be logged in the OSHA log. So if you have more questions about that, ask me. It's very technical, lots of info. Um, Controls and plan, make sure you implement your engineering, administrative, and you write them down, you verify effectiveness, and you update your hearing protection device choices. Verify, train people, look at their fit, offer a variety of PPE, and conduct that fit testing, making sure that people are doing it the right way. Review and monitor and changes, keep materials accessible to employees, a little bit of assessing noise controls for you guys, an example of what to ask so that you know if you're having barriers, sound absorbing materials, all good stuff. So this is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics says. At 85 decibels, a worker is receiving a 50% dose of noise, and at 90 decibels, it's a 100% dose. So that's why we have to keep them under 90 decibels. More on what we already discussed on the standard threshold shift, a little bit of what that hearing loss is, and just reminding you that hearing is important. That's why we're required to have that hearing conservation program. So if it's do your shout test, if you don't want to do a shout test, do your app, use your app, calibrate your app, know the triggers and the limits per the regulation, and then make sure you follow that map, steps 1 through 12 per the slides I gave you, or utilize that guide, state fund flowchart, and ask any questions. We're always here to help you. Send us an email. Is there anything else? I know this was quick, fast and furious, but we needed to get it done. We needed to give you the basics. And I really wanted you to walk away with the ABCs. So just really briefly, I'm going to put the links to those two videos. Let's see. Or did you already do it, Liz?
I put the link for one of the videos, but not the other. I will go ahead and stop the recording now.